The Friday Kids. A radiant midday sun drenched the tightly clustered homes of a moderately sized urban neighborhood. Here, every Friday afternoon exuded a particular energy. By 4 o'clock, the local families, returning from their weekly routines, could sense the weekend approaching. Shops bustled with last-minute customers, streets reverberated with passing motorcycles, and children ambled home from school. Between 5 and 6, the entire district teemed with pedestrians and vehicles, culminating in a familiar hum of excitement just before everyone settled in for 2 days of rest. This was an ordinary environment, save for one astounding fact that most residents never detected. In the months preceding, an extraordinary pattern occurred each Friday. At precisely 5 p.m., the timeline reset 30 minutes into the past. Virtually no one noticed or remembered, as their minds replayed those minutes identically, devoid of awareness of any repetition. Yet there existed a small band of adolescents, who came to call themselves the Friday Kids, who retained absolute consciousness of these weekly rewinds. For them, the experience was vivid. Each time 5 p.m. struck, they would glimpse a faint flicker and hum in the air, and then find themselves back at 4:30 p.m. No adult or passerby appeared to notice the reset. Bystanders repeated identical gestures as if on autopilot. Shop owners rearranged their same produce. Bus drivers re-followed identical routes, and parents rehashed the same dinner plans. But for the Friday Kids, that weekly half-hour was an opportunity to alter minor mishaps, gather intelligence on local happenings, or simply indulge in the realization that time itself was malleable. In the early stages, they treated it like a fun curiosity, a period for small pranks or for recovering a forgotten homework assignment. Their private excitement grew with each repeated half-hour. Yet as the group conferred, they realized their partial control over these repeats entailed responsibilities. They observed that small changes, like preventing someone from dropping their groceries, could produce slightly improved outcomes for the local citizens, who repeated their actions unaware. But it also raised complex ethical questions. Was it morally right to fix every trivial mistake in those 30 minutes? Could meddling in others' affairs lead to unintended consequences beyond the short loop? Curiously, none of these teenagers grasped why only they remembered. Some guessed it might relate to puberty, that adolescent brains might store memories outside the standard reset range. Others suspected geography. Many of them stayed at school for late activities on Fridays, close to something mysterious that unleashed the weekly half-hour do-over. Whispers of a rumored military experiment left over in their school further stoked their imaginations. This rumor, about an unused antenna perched on the roof or a sealed-off basement, eventually led them to suspect a hidden device that might be distorting time. In the weeks ahead, they decided to investigate. They had little knowledge of advanced physics, but believed that understanding the phenomenon's source could help them handle it responsibly. Over subdued meetings, some at the local library, others in each other's kitchens, they devised a plan to explore the school grounds discreetly and see if, indeed, a relic from some old research might be causing the Friday loop. Their cunning and resourcefulness would soon test the boundary of reason, as they peered into a labyrinth of secrets well beyond normal teenage pranks. Though they all shared the bizarre experience of a 30-minute rewind each Friday at 5 p.m., not everyone initially believed it was real. Eventually, a core group emerged, calling themselves the Friday Kids as a private bond. This was not an official club with rosters or badges, but a camaraderie that arose from their unusual predicament. Each member brought individual strengths and curiosities. The studious girl. She excelled academically despite financial challenges in her family, which gave her a determined work ethic. At first, she doubted the existence of any time anomaly, suspecting illusions. However, her methodical notes and repeated sightings of the same minor events between 4:30 and 5 p.m. convinced her the loop was real. Eager for rational understanding, she documented each Friday meticulously, cross-referencing small details that changed or remained consistent across resets. The tech-focused boy, known for tinkering with electronics and coding, he quickly became enthralled by the faint hum that announced each weekly rewind. He tested the local radio frequencies, perceiving an odd spike in electromagnetic activity centered near the school's premises. Before long, he concluded that a hidden system must be emitting that signal. He was delighted by the puzzle, envisioning ways to harness or refine the distortion, if that were even possible. The empathetic girl, sincerely committed to helping neighbors, she participated in local volunteer programs. Realizing the loop provided a chance to preempt certain daily blunders, like forgetting a bus pass or locking oneself out, she embraced the half-hour as a stealthy means of doing good. Nevertheless, she worried about a tampering effect, the notion that changing events, even small ones, might generate unexpected ripples. The introverted artist, he yearned for bigger explorations of the world but lived under strict parental supervision. The notion of an extra half-hour, free to be replayed, appealed strongly to his sense of wonder. He filled a sketchbook with dramatic images of repeated or parallel cityscapes. Yet he also felt an undercurrent of unease, aware that any slip in controlling time might have major consequences. Additional friends, each with distinct talents, completed the circle. Initially, they tested simpler tasks in the repeated half-hour, retrieving lost items, warning classmates of upcoming quizzes, or even orchestrating silly pranks that got undone in the original timeline. Soon they realized they possessed something akin to a superpower. However, they also recognized boundaries. They vowed not to exploit the loop for theft or to humiliate others, lest they become the very cause of trouble. Their name, the Friday Kids, while playful, reflected how only they consistently observed each Friday's cyclical half-hour. Together, they started to examine the rumor that the school was once a site for secret military trials, perhaps explaining why a handful of teenagers with a certain vantage point could detect the weekly phenomenon. In time, they set their sights on the roof's mysterious tower, often dismissed as a lightning rod, and on locked basement rooms rumored to exist below the building. The question was whether they had the courage and cunning to investigate, and how they could do so without tipping off school employees or local authorities. The school building stood as a sturdy relic of mid-20th century architecture. It boasted tall windows, a large central courtyard, and a few wings that housed classrooms, labs, and offices. In a corner of the roof loomed a bizarre metallic frame, rusting and seemingly disused. Some staff believed it had once been a radio antenna, others an older generation of parabolic equipment that lost relevance decades ago. After repeated Fridays, the Friday Kids noticed that standing in the courtyard near 5 p.m. heightened the loop's humming sensation. They felt a prickling in their arms and an odd heaviness in the air. Convinced that the device on the roof and some portion of the building's underground structure were behind the loop, they organized a clandestine excursion. A Friday after school ended, they lingered until 4 o'clock or 4:15, and once the other students and most staff left, they scouted for an entry to the rumored basement. Ultimately, behind a disused auditorium, they found a small padlocked door leading down narrow stairs. With the tech-focused boys' improvised lockpick, they slipped inside. Flashlights in hand, they navigated dusty corridors thick with cobwebs. The gloom gave the place a cryptic atmosphere, metal doors, a faint smell of mold, broken chairs stacked in corners. And then, in a far recess, they found a room lined with metal panels, cables running up through the ceiling. Rusty dials and control boards evoked mid-century electronics. A battered sign read Project Chronosis, or so it appeared, though time and grime had eroded some letters. Their pulses quickened. Chronosis suggested a root in chronos, time. Shuffling through old crates, they found typed pages referencing an emitter and a synchronization module, as well as coded references to frequencies and wave manipulation. Here and there, references to experiments on controlling short, time-lag intervals lurked in partial paragraphs. Though the kids did not find any official label or date, the style of the equipment and mention of military involvement strongly implied a top-secret operation from decades back, perhaps left behind when the building was converted fully into a school. Time pressed on. Sensing the approach of 5 p.m., they hastily snapped photos with their phones. Fearful that the loop might erase physical evidence, they stuffed a few crumbling documents in backpacks. Then they sprinted upstairs. By 4:59, they reached the courtyard, hearts racing. The clock struck 5 o'clock, the hum crescendoed, and, like every previous Friday, they found themselves back at 4:30, with no one else seeming to notice. But they retained the pictures, the notes, and the knowledge that in some subterranean corner, Chronosis was quietly operating. In the days that followed, they pored over the photographs and rescued papers. While many lines were water-damaged, the repeated references to a clock synchronization device gave them chills. The research apparently revolved around generating consistent short-time reversals, possibly 30 minutes, aimed at some kind of tactical advantage. Had it never been deactivated? Left unmonitored, it now triggered an unintended weekly time loop. The question was whether to try switching it off or exploring further. If they did nothing, the device might continue to warp the timeline indefinitely. And if they meddled with it too ignorantly, they risked a catastrophic meltdown, or at least losing the half-hour they'd come to rely on. While the Friday kids wrapped their heads around the Chronosis revelations, everyday life in the neighborhood churned on in habitual ignorance. Most adults simply carried out their routines, none the wiser that every Friday at 5 p.m. their memory wiped and reset to 4:30. Only the Friday kids retained awareness, capitalizing on the opportunity to rectify small mishaps or help out in subtle ways. One example involved a car that consistently caused a traffic blockage at a certain intersection each Friday at around 4:45. The driver typically parked irresponsibly, sparking annoyance and minor jams. So the Friday kids, after seeing it once in the first pass, reapproached in the second run, after 5 o'clock reset them to 4:30, to politely redirect the driver or place a barrier that dissuaded parking there. The driver never realized it, but a recurring hassle was mitigated. Another case saw them rescue a stray dog that roamed near a grocery store. On the original pass, it nearly got hit. In the repeated half-hour, they guided it safely to an animal shelter. Again, no one except the group remembered the first pass, so the difference went unrecognized by the rest of the world. Their sense of empowerment grew, yet they knew that altering events carried moral weight. Sometimes, no matter how they tried, certain patterns repeated themselves anyway. For instance, a family argument that always erupted around 4:50 repeated in each run, no matter what minor tweaks the kids attempted, suggesting some events were more fixed. The consistent unpredictability of people's free will also came into play. Not everyone would heed a random teenager's warning in the second timeline, so some accidents recurred. With each attempt, the Friday kids learned humility. Possession of advanced knowledge didn't guarantee control over outcomes. Meanwhile, They remained torn over the bigger question. Should they keep letting Chronosis function, giving them this half hour of hidden power each week? Or was it their duty to dismantle it? The more they explored the basement, the more they sensed the device was no mere novelty. The battered documents indicated that large expansions of time distortion had once been considered, but technical stability was questionable. They shuddered at the hypothetical scenario of a meltdown, an uncontrollable loop overshadowing the entire city or the region. As it stood, they had no official manual or training, only partial notes, guesswork, and the knowledge that meddling with time was inherently risky. So they continued in a hesitant status quo. Each Friday at 5 p.m., they took advantage of the second pass to perform small, kindly interventions for the local community while avoiding reckless changes. They scouted more thoroughly in the basement. They also worried about authorities discovering or forcibly decommissioning the contraption. The sense of precarious balance loomed. One misstep could unravel the entire phenomenon, or, in the worst case, lead to an expanded meltdown of the local timeline. Over subsequent Fridays, the Friday Kids launched repeated basement explorations. They carried improved gear, flashlights, phone cameras, and a homemade electromagnetic meter. Although they risked occasional sightings by custodians, they strategized. If they were caught in the corridor around 4:50, they would rely on the inevitable 5 p.m. reset to revert to 4:30 and reapproach more carefully. This gave them boldness, but also a sense that time had become their ally as well as a potential adversary. In one clandestine foray, they discovered a hidden alcove behind a pile of unused chairs. Inside lay a second control cabinet, labeled Chronosis, Beta Control. The electronics looked older, possibly using vacuum tubes. A few faint lights flickered, suggesting minimal current still coursed through the lines. By following cables, they deduced these wires led to that rooftop antenna. They found a partial schematic on a moldy blueprint describing something called the Master Clock Sync Module. The text indicated that the loop was specifically pinned to a certain hour each week, presumably 5 p.m. on Fridays, though the original impetus was unknown. In rummaging through misfiled documents, they stumbled onto references of micro time lags, not to exceed 30 minutes. That validated what they were living. Each Friday, the system produced a short, stable rewinding. The kids marveled at the notion that the device hadn't been deactivated. Possibly, its designers left it sealed away decades ago, and it continued functioning in partial standby, reinitializing the local timeline weekly in a minor test loop. The group's next question was, if a short loop was possible, could it suddenly become a longer loop if the system overloaded? Their curiosity led them to tinker with the vacuum tube panel. They measured faint current in the lines, surmising the main power feed had never been fully cut. They dared not sever it abruptly for fear of unleashing a destructive chain reaction. Yet letting it operate indefinitely gave them pause. The basement's floor was littered with references to military oversight, though nobody else in the present day seemed to realize what lay here. The kids recognized that in theory, one could try to adjust parameters to either expand or reduce the loop, but they had only partial knowledge. In the absence of guidelines, random tinkering could prove catastrophic. At the same time, rummaging in unrelated boxes revealed archived school records, old yearbooks, and dusty supplies. Most of it was mundane, but it hammered home how oblivious the staff remained. Each new Friday, the group ventured down to glean more details. Wiring diagrams, cryptic code logs, leftover magnetized tapes. They had little success finding a definitive manual for shutting down Chronosis. Anxiety mounted at the possibility that the device might malfunction or draw official attention. Yet they were enthralled by the sense of standing at the cusp of a clandestine frontier bridging present, past technology, and time's fabric. In these visits, they sometimes heard footsteps in upper hallways. Fearful of staff intrusion, they occasionally abandoned the mission early. They reasoned they'd return on the next loop if needed. That repeated half-hour, ironically, was their greatest safeguard. If discovered at 4:50, they could vanish by 5 o'clock. So they proceeded, uncertain whether to publicly reveal what they'd found, weigh the moral duty of continuing small-scale rescues in the loop, or attempt a graceful shutdown. By then, the Friday kids had spent multiple Fridays taking advantage of the half-hour loop, preventing small accidents or inconveniences in the neighborhood. They joked that they were timekeepers, albeit only for a short interval each week. Yet their illusions of control began eroding as they recognized the deeper stakes of Project Chronosis. The device gave them power but could cause chaos if it malfunctioned. The academically inclined girl was leaning toward a methodical approach. Ideally, they should gather the best data possible, then carefully end the loop, returning time to a single linear flow. She argued that a piece of vintage military technology, abandoned in an unsecured environment, was a ticking time bomb. She no longer believed they could simply keep enjoying the partial advantage of altering the neighborhood each week, given that the device might have unpredictable results. In contrast, the electronics-minded boy found the concept of fine-tuning Chronosis appealing, as if it might be stabilized to continue providing that extra half-hour each Friday without risk. If it worked, they could keep quietly benefiting the community. Yet he lacked the full schematics, and he realized guesswork with a time-distorting invention might lead to an extended or indefinite loop. He admitted some fear, but the puzzle fascinated him. The empathetic girl felt conflicted. She saw the tangible good they had done, like saving that stray dog, preventing countless petty accidents, versus the potential harm if a meltdown occurred. She also recalled a couple of times they had inadvertently made events worse, such as the fiasco with the runaway truck. Would removing the loop let more mishaps happen? Or was letting it persist irresponsible? She had no clear answer. The introverted artist, caught in private reveries, envisioned a cosmic unraveling. If the device lost stability, it could keep pushing them back hour by hour or day by day, until the entire region was stuck in an endless replay. This frightened him more than he cared to admit. So he proposed they look for a fail-safe switch, a structured shutdown to ensure they didn't cause a bigger cataclysm. Unable to agree conclusively, they carried on investigating. They resolved not to mention the loop to any adult, worried that outsiders might forcibly seize or remove the machine, or that authorities might harness it for dubious ends. That secrecy meant they lacked official help. Meanwhile, each Friday let them practice further interventions, albeit more cautiously since the truck accident. Tension built as a few new developments loomed on the horizon. An adult teacher growing suspicious, unexpected electric anomalies, and the creeping sense that Chronosis' next glitch might cause a meltdown beyond a mere 30-minute repeat. Inevitably, the group's secretive routines attracted the attention of one particular teacher, keen-eyed and often staying late at the school for administrative or extracurricular tasks. He started noticing that every Friday, a handful of students displayed odd behaviors. They lingered around certain corridors, occasionally appearing to know things before they transpired. Their notebooks featured half-hour blocks suspiciously out of sync with normal class records. Over time, he hypothesized that these teenagers were involved in something covert. Though he had no concept of a time loop, he guessed they might be exploring off-limits areas, especially as he glimpsed them near locked basement entries. The teachers saw fleeting clues. A desk moved from one place to another, a door that was closed at 4:40 but mysteriously open at 5 o'clock, yet no evidence that anyone had physically touched it. Without a direct memory, he found these small contradictions puzzling. A major push occurred one Friday at 4:40 in the neighborhood. A heavy truck carrying supplies lost control on a sloping street and lightly crashed into a store's outer wall. In that first pass, damage was moderate and no one was injured. The kids, convinced they could avert the problem in the second pass, regrouped to plan an intervention. They intended to warn the driver about the faulty brakes or create a barrier so he wouldn't descend the slope too quickly. Yet in the second pass, after 5 o'clock sent them back to 4:30, the driver misinterpreted their frantic warnings as a childish stunt, ignoring them. The kid's improvised barricade only caused him to veer more abruptly, culminating in a collision with a lamppost that left a passing pedestrian injured. As a result, the final outcome was worse than the original. This horrifying realization shattered their naive faith that they could fix everything with foresight. They learned a sobering truth. Life's chain of events was not easily molded by their presence, and well-meant meddling might spark unexpected complications. Simultaneously, the teacher saw their evident distress after 5 o'clock. Though he did not fully grasp the cause, he noticed them running around just before the crash, then repeating similar confusion in the second iteration. It strengthened his belief that these students controlled or knew something hidden. Determined to unearth the truth, he began seeking official building maps and references, suspecting a link between them and the locked basement area. He planned a thorough search, or at least a plan to catch them in the act. The fiasco with the truck, combined with the teacher's mounting curiosity, forced the Friday kids to reevaluate their approach. They realized the 30-minute advantage could not always guarantee positive changes and might make events worse. They also recognized the basement's older documents contained hints that the device's range might unpredictably expand if certain conditions arose. One phrase repeated in the degraded papers: instability under high energy surges. They interpreted it to mean that if Chronosis received an electrical overload, such as from an unexpected external power spike, its half-hour loop might broaden or spiral out of control. Some lines even hinted at the possibility of indefinite replays. That dread idea overshadowed their daily existence. If the system ever broke, it might trap them, or the entire city, in repeated intervals far beyond 30 minutes. Meanwhile, the local electric company planned a deeper inspection of the school premises, alarmed by fluctuating consumption each Friday near 5 p.m. They might locate the hidden power feed to the antenna, inadvertently fiddling with cables or shutting them off incorrectly. The kids began to fear an adult might forcibly disable the equipment or, worse, cause an abrupt meltdown that triggered a temporal quake. If that happened, the consequences were unknown, possibly catastrophic. Hence, they accelerated their efforts to find a safe shutdown protocol. Their main hope lay in the tech-savvy boy's plan. He was assembling a soft power controller that would gently throttle electricity to the basement device, letting it deactivate step by step. If it worked, they might end the loop peacefully. However, they lacked a full blueprint, meaning trial and error could prove dangerous. As the weeks passed, the group grew more nervous about each Friday. The empathetic girl worried that if they did nothing, a meltdown might spontaneously occur at any moment. Another misjudged intervention like the truck incident haunted them. The academic girl agreed, pointing out the device was never meant to remain hidden for so many decades. The introverted artist sketched swirling images of a timeline unraveling into chaos, capturing everyone's anxieties. In short, a silent countdown was in place. Discover a stable shutdown before an adult's bungled discovery, or the device's meltdown forced a disastrous chain reaction. The vigilant teacher, more convinced than ever that these adolescents were up to something extraordinary, devised a new plan. He would linger after school on Friday, using minor excuses to remain in the building until 5 p.m. If feasible, he aimed to stealthily follow them to that basement door he suspected. Lacking official clearance, he still wanted proof. That Friday, however, he was summoned to an off-site teacher training at 4 p.m., thwarting his direct pursuit. Undeterred, he left a small recording device hidden near the auditorium's corridor, hoping to catch footage or audio of the kids sneaking in around 4:30 or 4:40. He suspected that whatever they did peaked just before 5 o'clock. He had no idea that any captured evidence might be compromised by the loop or that the kids might effortlessly reset if they got caught. Meanwhile, the kids remained largely unaware of this hidden camera. Their bigger concern that day was the ongoing presence of electric company technicians who roamed the building, taking meter readings and investigating anomalies in the wiring. The group suspected that if these technicians stumbled upon the antenna's panel, they might forcibly yank cables or remove fuses, with no idea of the underlying temporal mechanics. One such brash action could unleash the meltdown scenario they dreaded. Realizing they were out of time, the kids prepared to finalize the homemade controller. They selected this very Friday to do the soft shutdown around 4:45, hoping to preempt meltdown or clumsy adult interference. The academic girl and the empathetic one recognized the moral weight. Once they shut Chronosis down, those half-hour replays would vanish permanently. They would also forfeit the small community improvements they provided weekly. But better that than risk a cataclysm. Together, they resolved, we end it safely, or else it might end us. That climactic Friday arrived. The school's atmosphere felt charged. Inspectors roamed the corridors. The teacher had set up a camera, and the Friday kids were about to implement their plan. Sometime after 4 o'clock, the kids split off from the crowd and slipped into the basement undetected. They carried the tech-savvy boy's newly built interface, which they intended to attach to the main Chronosis control panel. By 4:30, they were in front of the dusty metal console in a cramped side room. A few lights blinked faintly, hinting that the system recognized external input. The group's intention was to gradually reduce the device's power feed so that, at the fated moment of 5 p.m., the system would not loop but instead softly deactivate. Tension ran high, as they lacked instructions for precisely how to do this. The boy performed final checks on his interface. They braced for an uncertain outcome. As the minutes ticked by, the hum that usually built up to 5 o'clock changed its tone. The electromagnetic readings on the boy's handheld meter spiked, indicating internal stress on the circuit. At 4:50, in the rush to manage all the dials, the boy accidentally reversed one dial's function, inadvertently sending an extra jolt of power into the antenna. The entire room shuddered with a metallic clang. The kids gasped in alarm, worried that the meltdown was beginning. They scrambled to revert the setting, disconnected the erroneous line, and reconnected the correct feed. The hum rose in pitch, then dropped again. Time was short. 4:55. 4:56. The group had to finalize the reconfiguration or accept failure. They pressed on, hooking the master switch device. Perspiration beaded on their faces, hearts hammering, as the console lights flickered ominously. Above them, the inspectors approached from some corridor, curious about unusual power readings from the sublevel. The kids realized if they got cornered now, the half-hour loop might trigger with an unsettled, dangerously loaded system. Finally, at 4:59, everything was in place. They retreated to a safer corner, hoping the new controller would moderate the system. The ambient hum rose to an alarming crescendo. The floor quivered. a few sparks jumped among the wires. They clutched each other's hands, expecting at any second to be flung back to 4:30 or, worse, pitched into an unknown time rift. The console's digital readout struck 5:00, but the loop didn't come. Instead, a brief flash of light erupted, the hum cut off, and the readout advanced to 5:01. The panel's monitors sank to 0, meaning no visible power flow. Odd, the kids realized Chronosis had switched off normally. No meltdown, no indefinite loop. They found themselves still in the basement at 5:01, time continuing forward for the first time on a Friday. They had forcibly ended the half-hour reset that had once dominated every weekly afternoon. Once the device fell silent and the clock surpassed 5 p.m. without a jump backward, an immediate sense of relief washed over them. They had avoided catastrophe. They also understood the finality. With Chronosis turned off in a controlled manner, there would be no more 4:30 resets, no second chance to rectify minor incidents or vantage points. The trade-off was sobering but necessary. They rushed out of the side room. Near the stairs, they encountered the power company inspectors and the suspicious teacher. The men spotted them emerging from a sealed area, obviously startled. The teacher recognized their involvement, though he had no direct evidence of a time loop. The inspectors saw the old console, still warm, exuding a faint smell of burnt metal from where the connections had been undone. Alarms flashed in their minds. The place could have triggered a serious electrical hazard. They insisted on severing every feed line, labeling the basement unsafe for any occupant. The kids offered no thorough explanation, slipping away amid the confusion. The teacher found more than enough cause to question how they got inside, but the priority for all adults was immediate safety. That same evening, the building's management fully cut power to the entire sub-basement. Over the coming days, local authorities arrived, removing the archaic electronics. No formal mention of time manipulation found its way into official records. If any of the documents hinted at it, those in charge either dismissed it as nonsense or buried it quietly. The teacher, though left with an uneasy sense of a deeper puzzle, lacked the conclusive proof to pursue it further. The next week, the entire neighborhood carried on with typical Friday routines. The kids anxiously observed the clock at 4:30, for 45, for 59, but there was no flicker or hum. The timeline marched steadily to 5 o'clock, 5:01, and beyond. The extra half hour ended quietly, never to return. Though the majority of residents never realized the difference, for the Friday kids, it was both a relief and a loss. They felt that the singular advantage they had cherished, ironically used to help their neighbors, had vanished. Yet they also knew they had removed a hidden threat that might have spiraled out of control. In the days that followed, each member processed the experience differently. The academically inclined girl felt validated in her call for caution. The tech-savvy boy had learned the danger of tinkering with advanced phenomena under ignorance. The empathetic girl felt relief that no meltdown occurred, but missed how they had discreetly aided the neighborhood. The introverted artist gained a final sense of awe, capturing in his drawings the ephemeral nature of the loop, how controlling time had ended up controlling them. They had grown in ways no adult around them realized. With the secret apparatus dismantled, the city resumed its usual existence. Businesses continued to open and close at routine hours on Fridays. People juggled errands and social activities, and no second iteration of that half hour ever recurred. As far as the broader population was concerned, the same unremarkable pattern repeated every weekend. Except, ironically, the biggest anomaly of all had been removed without them noticing. The school administration, now aware there had been leftover military tech, oversaw further renovations in the sub-basement. Walls were demolished, cables tossed away. A final official statement concluded it had been old communications gear from decades prior, never properly disposed of. The teacher who had suspected something bigger eventually put the puzzle to rest. His attempts to cross-check recordings from the auditorium corridor yielded only fleeting shapes and inexplicable gaps. He suspected the students had discovered some clandestine equipment and turned it off, but verifying a real-time loop? He lacked the evidence. Years later, he occasionally recalled the weird coincidences, still uncertain about what truly transpired. For the Friday kids, life advanced inexorably. The year progressed. They took new classes, joined clubs, made future plans. None of them forgot those strange weeks of living 2 half-hours each Friday. In private, they shared recollections of how they saved neighbors, bungled some interventions, and uncovered the relic of a lost experiment in temporal manipulation. Each carried forward an abiding lesson. The capacity to fix or change events can be a gift, but not an unambiguous blessing. The hidden consequences are unpredictable, and interfering with time on any scale demands both humility and vigilance. Thus concluded the tale of the Friday kids and their ephemeral dominion over the 4:30 to 5 p.m. slot. A story few beyond them would ever believe, tied forever to a dusty school basement, a rusting antenna, and the short and wondrous time loops that had once given them a fleeting sense of shaping destiny. In the end, normalcy had reasserted itself, and the city's Fridays remained strictly linear, with no memory of the recurring magic that had quietly threaded them for so many weeks.